Okay, so my name's Sammy. I'm a very grateful recovered member of Cocaine Anonymous. Yeah, me and Kobe actually used to chair and co-chair the detox meeting together for quite some time, so she's heard my short story a lot of times. So we made a joke this morning. She was like, "Oh, I get to listen to it again." And Kobe's absolutely right. I love CA with all of my heart. I would do anything to watch it grow, to watch it prosper. And the reason for that is because CA introduced me to a God of my understanding or my not understanding. I no longer question God. I'd fill you in that I don't understand God, nor do I wish to. I don't question him anymore. What I do know is that by being in these rooms and by allowing God to be a part of my life has prospered. I have received multiple just unexplainable gifts in my life as a result of God being part of my life today. So what I'm going to try to do, I always start off with the same spiel. My purpose of sharing my story with you is to try and encourage anybody that's struggling with any part of their recovery, or somebody that's new to recovery that might be struggling, is try to encourage at least one of those people to put their best foot forward in their recovery. Because today I truly believe with my whole heart that every single person in this room deserves to live a life worth living, regardless of what you've done, regardless of what dark path your recovery has taken you. We all deserve to be happy. I know when I came into the rooms of CA, I wasn't new to recovery. I had tried to get sober multiple times before, and my reason for finding and stumbling across CA was, before me and Robbie became the iconic couple, we were friends, believe it or not, for quite some time, and Robbie just introduced me to this meeting and said, "I've been to this awesome place," and it was actually the Monday night meeting right before this one here that just happened yesterday. And when I came into the rooms of CA, I couldn't even, I'd been to every kind of A and every recovery, meeting you could possibly think of. I used to belong to them all. And when I came into CA, it was like this, I can't even explain. It was like an overwhelming, empowering voice, just everybody all at once. Like the energy of everybody in the room was all screaming at me. They all had something. Every person that spoke and shared that day had something that I so desperately wanted. And I started exploring a little bit more, and I went into other meetings and stuff, and I couldn't believe the message I was hearing. It was different from anything I'd ever heard, because for the first time I was really hearing hope. I was hearing about people's recovery and how they had done it, as opposed to, the verbal vomit of what was wrong in their life today, which used to make me feel like crap when I would leave a meeting and I would just listen to a bunch of people complain about what was wrong with their day, like I did. Don't get me wrong, I did it too, because don't you know it's all about me and my problems are so much bigger than yours, right? And so I did the same thing where I verbal vomited all of the terrible things that went wrong with me and how I'm just so grateful for the things that I do have in my life. I was one of those sharers. And CA it was just like this storm that had overwhelmed me. It captured my heart, and I've given it my all ever since then. I'm involved in a lot of service work. I love doing service work, and my reason for that, like I said, is because CA has single-handedly the reason for connecting me to a higher power that has done miracles in my life today. So growing up as a child, I started drinking. I'm 26 now, almost 27. I hate saying that out loud. I'm not ready to age yet. But I started drinking when I was 10 years old. It was the first time that I ever got drunk. And I did it wrong. The very first time that I ever did it. So don't know if many of you know what the statistics are, but 1 in 5 people are alcoholic or addicted, as they say. We kind of compile them, drug addicted, alcoholics. We're all really the same. And I'm that one. You know what I mean? 1 of those 5. And the other 4, they regularly take a drink and they can have one and they can put it back and they can go to bed and not think another thing about it. They can put half of the wine bottle back up in the cupboard and not have a second thought about it. I didn't find this out until much later on in my recovery, but did you know that the average, the normal drinker out there in the world never ever has that recurring thought of, I need more? Never. They've never experienced it. They don't know what that feels like. And when I found that out for the first time, I went to a big book study in CA. It blew my mind. I'm like, what do you mean? My brain's always worked like that. Every time I put a substance into my body, my brain screams, I need more right now, before I've even had time to process what's already in there. And it just kind of spiraled out of control after that. I fell in love with it. But growing up as a kid, I was pretty normal. Lots of people, normal in a sense, lots of people in addiction, it kind of goes hand in hand to have lots of trauma or to grow up in a dysfunctional family and all those kind of things. That is many people's story in addiction. But it like others, I found out it was not It was not my story. You know, I had a relatively normal childhood growing up as a kid. I had 4 great-grandparents. I had 4 great-grandparents. My entire life growing up, I was blessed to have, 8 beautiful, elderly, wise people that taught me so much individually. Each one of them passed on something so special to me, as most people don't have the opportunity to meet their grandparents nowadays. And I was blessed to have all of them. My family tried very hard to raise me with good morals and good principles. I was taught to open up the door for the little old lady that was, behind me, or for the next person that was behind me. I was taught to hold the door open for them, out of love and respect. I was taught to use my manners. I was taught to say please and thank you, to show gratitude for what I was given. I was taught to be respectful, kind, loving, and tolerant of other people. That's how my family raised me. However, for reasons I still yet don't understand, I am an addict. And there's nothing I can do to change that. I've stopped trying to question why I'm an addict. It doesn't really matter. I am one. And one of the most important people in my recovery today, Devin, has shared before that, it's like when your house is burning down, you know what I mean? You don't walk around the burning house and ask, why did the fire start? You just get the fuck out. You know what I mean? But here I am my entire life as an addict, and I'm questioning why I'm an addict and trying to figure it out instead of getting out of it, instead of finding the solution that's been right in front of me the whole time. It just doesn't make any sense to search around that house and figure it out, so I've stopped questioning. It doesn't matter. There's lots of theories in behind it. It could be biological. My biological father was an addict. However, he wasn't a part of my life growing up, so I didn't have that, I didn't have to look up to that. That wasn't my experience to have him in the home. So, and there's like the trauma, lots of things it's caused from trauma, you know what I mean? But I didn't have that. That wasn't my story until later on in life because of the situations that I put myself in. So I don't know why I'm an addict. I just know that I am. And growing up with drugs and alcohol and stuff, I started becoming rebellious at a very young age. I had a really difficult time trying to fit in at school. And with other people, I just always felt different. I always felt like I didn't belong. And I'm starting to notice a pattern that the more speaker meetings I listen to, I'm starting to realize that most of us feel like we didn't belong in some way or another. And so we tried to find an escape. And like lots of people in the rooms, drugs and alcohol were that escape for me. At a very young age, I figured it out. And I always wanted to be the person who did the best. I always wanted to draw attention to myself because I wanted people to like me. And so you see, when I went to the very first party, I was brought by a friend who was trying to give me a shot, but she liked me, but was kind of a little bit embarrassed to say that she liked me, but she was hung out with all the cool kids. We had grown up with each other, and she had invited me into this party almost out of pity. You know what I mean? And she brought me there, and so I got drunk for the first time. Like I said, I did it wrong. I downed 3 glasses of whiskey as fast as I possibly could. And I remember very vividly, I was sitting there at the kitchen table at this person's house we were having the party on, and I had downed as fast as I could because the taste was so gross. And so I just downed it as fast as I could, not knowing what was going to happen. I remember putting my head down on the table for about 2 seconds. I was starting to get really tired. And I put my head back up, and it was like all of a sudden when I lifted my head, the world started spinning around me, and I got this like fantastic feeling of like, oh my God, this is cool. And I really liked it, and I kept going. I didn't stop, or I didn't say, oh, this is really cool, I'm going to enjoy it. I was like, I need more of this. This is going to keep me going. And I guess I did it wrong. And I blacked out drunk for the very first time ever. From the very first time I drank, I blacked out drunk, did it wrong, puked all over myself, caused just havoc everywhere. I was puking in people's pots and pans from the kitchen of the house we were in, puked on the side of the couch. Yeah, right? Classy lady, And I woke up the next morning with a terrible, terrible hangover, and I was like, but all I could remember, so the book has taught me, and through my experience by doing my steps and looking back at my life, the book tells me that, I am unable to see what alcohol and drugs do to me. I am only capable of seeing what they have done for me. And all I could recollect the next morning was that drugs and alcohol made me feel like I was on top of the world. And for that brief couple of hours that we were drinking and smoking pot, I realized that all these cool kids who did not want anything to do with me at school all of a sudden became best friends. We were laughing, you know what I mean? And like, even though I was throwing up, we were still having fun. And you know what I mean? And none of those people cared that I was a loser kid in school. They all wanted to hang out and have fun with me. You know what I mean? And that was like, it made perfect sense for me. I was like, if I keep doing this, people like me, and then I'll have somewhere to fit in. And then it started to spiral out of control, and I ended up with a boyfriend at the end of grade 7. And I decided that this was my first real love. Like, I was so madly in love with this guy, and I was going to live the rest of my life with him. Like, this is at a week before my 13th birthday, and I'm already thinking about getting married. Talk about trying to fill a void. So I was already trying to fill this inescapable void inside of me of just needing to feel belonged and wanted by anybody. You know what I mean? At the age of, like I said, a week before my 13th birthday, talking about getting married. You know what I mean? And it turns out that this guy that I was dating was actually much older than he had said that he was. And it turned into a very big disaster. I ended up getting into a lot of trouble. I was introduced to a lot more alcohol. I was introduced to a lot more drugs. And it ended up convincing me that I was able to live on my own and that I could figure it out for myself. And of course, because I'd become so rebellious and leaving parties and going to parties, and I started sneaking out of my bedroom window at the age of 13. I would sneak out my bedroom window and go out and then come back in the morning before my parents woke up. And I would go out to these parties and stuff with this new boyfriend that I had. And my life started to spiral out of control very, very fast. And the thing was is that I literally thought that I was invincible. I would leave my room and I would walk all the way from, I lived in Ranchlands, northwest of Calgary here, and I would walk all the way from Ranchlands, Hellengone, to the other side of Arbor Lake. It's not that far when you're driving. It's like a 2-minute drive, but walking, it was a good 45 minutes. And this was at like 12 o'clock in the morning where I was out walking here, and like robberies and stuff like that in my small neighborhood weren't unheard of. You know what I mean? Child molesters that were coming to pick people up and stuff. Those were common things that happened in my neighborhood. And I would leave at the middle of the night, and I put myself in so much risk. It's literally a miracle that I didn't get hurt, that something didn't happen to me, that I didn't get hit by a car. You know what I mean? There's so many things that could have gone wrong with that situation. And just the high off of the lifestyle that I was starting to live made me feel like I was invincible to all of those risks. And I put myself in a lot of danger, and it got worse and worse and worse over the years. And very quickly, once I had left home at the age of 13, my life started to become very violent because of drugs and alcohol. The people that I were hanging out with were not very nice people. I also started to become very violent too. When I got drunk, I was a very mean drunk. And I didn't like, because of my relationships in my personal life, I didn't like being intimidated by anybody. So if you showed me any kind of, intimidation, if you tried to intimidate me, if you tried to be mean to me, if you tried to act like you were tougher than me, my instant response was to be tougher and bigger than you to protect myself. And it got me a lot of trouble. And so I lived this high-risk life from the time I was 13, moved out of home, and to this day, I have never lived with my parents since then because of the resentment that I had for them. And now that I've patched my relationship, well, I really shouldn't be living with my parents anymore. So that's just my story. I haven't lived with them ever since. But every relationship that I was in was extremely codependent. And because at the age of 13, even though I thought I had life figured out, the reality is that I was incapable of taking care of myself. You know what I mean? And so I relied very dependently on these relationships that I was in, and every single one of them was filled with drugs and alcohol, and every single one of them was physically abusive. And so I lived in this chaotic lifestyle, and I learned to adopt these as regular behaviors from people. Like, this is how I deserve to be treated, or well, if I had done this differently. And the weird mentality of my brain, the real reason I'm an addict is that, I took on all of this and I said, well, like, what can I do to be better? Every time a boyfriend would beat me up, I would say, well, if I cook, by the time he gets home, if I have supper ready, or if I clean the house a little bit more often, or if I'm a better person, then this person will love me. If I can just show them that they need to love me. That was my twisted mentality. In order to fill this void, I would accept that behavior and blame it on myself. And it was just this twisted pattern of chaos that I lived in. By the time that I was 14, in that first year after I left home, I had already started experimenting, went from alcohol to hallucinogenics, all the pills and stuff. By the time I was 14, almost 15, I was a full-blown cocaine addict. And I was using cocaine for 3 to 4 days at a time. It first started out very, very small. It started out where I would go for like a 12-hour period, and then my body just couldn't handle it anymore, and I ended up falling asleep. And slowly my tolerance started to build up, and within a very short period, by the end of that year, I was using cocaine for 2 to 3 days, sometimes 4 days at a time. And I lived my lifestyle like that until I was probably about, I think I was just 16 and a half, 17-ish. Somewhere around there. For about 2 years, I lived like that. And the boyfriend that I had started doing all of these other hard drugs on, this new boyfriend that I was with for a couple of years, me and him had broken up, and I just stopped using. And they talk about that in the book, and like, if there was the time and the place when you could have stopped, you wouldn't want to, and that's why we kept going. And I was that person. I stopped. I just cold turkey stopped using cocaine, and I stopped using other drugs. I still drank occasionally, and when I did drink, I was still mean. But I was still extremely codependent, so my addiction took role in lots of other ways, even though I wasn't using hard drugs. And my relationship that I was in, the very next one, was just a lot of drinking and still extremely abusive. And, he had 4 kids of his own, and I was at the age of 17, remind you, the age of 17, I was playing stepmom to 4 little girls, to the 2 oldest ones not even young enough to be my own. That was my lifestyle at the age of 17, was playing stepmom. And he didn't want any of his own children. And so when me and him broke up, I was just this deep need, because these children needed me the same way that, I felt needed by the relationships that I was in. Well, these children had given me this new high of life that I thought that I needed and wanted in my life. And I was going to be a great mom. I knew it. I was never going to do what my parents did to me. I was never going to, treat my parents, because they were so hard on me. You know what I mean? They had all these rules and stuff to keep me safe, and it was horrible. And I was never going to do that to my kids. And I was going to be fair to my kids. And I was going to lift my kids up, because I thought I was so hard done by. And so what did I do to fix that? Well, I got pregnant. Decided with this new man, being together only for 2.5 months, we decided that we were going to have a baby together. And he was just as broken of a person as I was. Just as broken as a person as I was. And we decided that the baby was going to fix our lives. And the 2 of us were going to merge together and live happily ever after for the rest of our lives. Keep in mind that I'm only 18 at this time. And so a year later, I had my first daughter, the one that's sitting here with me today. And when I had her, and the relationship between the 2 of us was so physically abusive, it was unfathomable. And because I was pregnant for the majority of that relationship, for the first time in my life, I was absolutely terrified, because I all of a sudden had something inside of me that I had to protect, and I could no longer fight back. And it was the first time in my life I wasn't able to raise my fist out of fear of what might happen if I let go of my belly. And it was the worst feeling in the world, and I was trapped inside of that for almost 10 months. Until about a month after she was born, I left up that relationship, worked up the courage to get out, and I went to my grandmother's place. And that's when, like I said, as soon as she came out, well, I was back to drinking occasionally and stuff like that, and I didn't do it very often, didn't really feel the need to. But once I moved in with my grandmother, the first little while when I was pregnant, we found out that my grandmother had breast cancer, and she went in for surgery and stuff, and 10 days before Mia was born, she had a mastectomy, and they said that it was gone. And then a couple months later, when I moved in with her after I had left that home, and we found out that my grandmother's cancer had come back in 3 major portions of her, 3 major organs of her body. There was just nothing that they could do to save her anymore, and that she was going to pass away. Now, this is a woman that basically helped raise me. Every time I broke up with an abusive relationship and left, in between that, I would go to my grandma's house. My grandmother always had her doors open for me. My mother and my grandmother actually had a very long history of resentment because of me, because they couldn't see eye to eye with things, where my mom was kind of like, she needs to figure this out, and this whole tough love thing, trying to teach me that it wasn't okay for me to treat my family members this way, and it wasn't okay for me to bend the rules whenever I felt like it. And my grandmother just said, well, if we just love her, she did what I did. If we just love her, if we just do this for her, then she'll change. My grandmother always wanted to see the best in me. And so every time I needed a place to live, I would manipulate her into feeling sorry for me, and I would go, and her doors were always open for me. My grandmother was, to this day, one of the most important people that has ever touched my life. And I was just told that she was nothing I was going to be able to help her anymore. And because I was with a brand new baby, and I was, just stricken by this alcoholic, chaotic life, and, I had nothing to do with my life, because I'd never held a proper job, because I was taken care of by all these men in my life, that meant that I was involuntarily given the role of her caretaker. And to help her out, because my grandfather had lodge stuff to do. Both of my parents worked full-time careers, and my cousin and my aunts lived so far out of the city that they couldn't be of help anyways. And so my family decided, you're here all day anyways, taking care of your brand new baby, help out with your grandmother. And part of me felt like I was responsible for that I needed to be, it's the least that I could do. I'm here now, she's always opened her doors to me, and so I need to help take care of her. What I didn't realize at the time is how much it was actually tormenting me. But you see, over the years, I'd become so good at shoving everything down on the inside of me and not paying attention to my feelings. And one day I remember waking up, and I was helping her make her breakfast, and I sat down on the couch with my brand new baby in my arms, and I sat down on the couch and I remember looking at the TV. And I remember feeling nothing. There's no anger, there was no sadness, there was no happiness. It was just, I felt so blah. And I didn't understand. And I was like, there's so much going on around me. I should feel something right now. And it was like this huge red flag popped in my head. There is something seriously wrong with you. You need to go talk to somebody. I think there might be seriously something wrong. And so I went and talked to the doctor, and they did a whole bunch of assessments, and they diagnosed me with severe postpartum depression. And so, and like I said, that was just a couple days before we found out that my grandmother's cancer had come back. And so they prescribed me some antidepressants, and I took a couple of them. But then, of course, when I found out she was sick, I said, I don't have time to be sick for me right now. My grandmother needs my full attention. And so I stopped taking my antidepressants, and I stopped doing what I needed to do to help myself get better. And I focused only on my grandmother and just raising the newborn baby. And shortly, a couple months later, I started drinking. So when the baby started sleeping through the night, when she was about three to 4 months old, I would leave in the middle of the night, and I would just put the baby monitor on, and I would leave it in my grandpa's room, which was, right across the hallway from hers. And I would leave it, and I would go out during the night and go and drink with my friends and stuff. And I would make sure I was back at about 3 o'clock in the morning, have a couple hours of sleep, and then I'd wake up at, 7:30, 8 o'clock when she woke up. And then I'd take care of her, have a couple naps in the afternoon when she did, and I was okay living like that. It was okay for me. I wasn't exhausted or anything, and it worked out really well. And then about a month before my grandmother passed away, or about a 10-month period, I managed to get in contact with that boyfriend that I started using the hard drugs with again. And of course, he was still using the hard drugs, so it wasn't that difficult for me to get my hands on them again. And he pulled it out one day, and I said, well, can I have one? And that was it. And I can literally pinpoint the day that my addiction spiraled out of control, because it was 10 times worse than it was when I had left it just 2.5 years prior to that. It had literally doubled. My need for it and the desire to get more in my body was so much stronger than it had ever been before. After waiting for so long, my body was like, yes, what have you been waiting for? And my body was just so excited about it. And after that, it was like days on end. And then I would come home and I would take care of the baby while I was high, and I'd hide away in my bedroom from my grandparents. And the paranoia, actually, that was the first time that paranoia started to strike me, was at that period when I started again. Because before, I'd never experienced paranoia. I just enjoyed the high for what it was. But when I started using again the paranoia and all those crazy thoughts, where I would literally sit in my grandfather's basement where me and the baby stayed, and I would keep my feet up on a chair, terrified, because mice are one of my biggest fears. I'm not like those unrealistic ones, like a real fear. Mice are it for me. And I would start to hallucinate that I could hear mice all over the place. And I would sit up in the middle of the basement with my feet up, tripping out, thinking that there was mice crawling all over the place, and that they were going to bite my toes, and I was going to get rabies. I spent majority of my time while I was in that house. I spent majority of my time while I was high. I spent majority of that time thinking that there was mice crawling around my feet. I didn't even enjoy it anymore. It wasn't even fun. Being high stopped being fun at that point for me, and my addiction took a turn for the worse, and it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And within a couple of years, I started living out of hotels. I started working illegally, and I started making a really, really big amount of cash all of the time. And so I was able to feed my addiction. I was able to get whatever I wanted when I wanted it. And so, of course, naturally, I moved out, got my own car and stuff. Me and the baby went and moved somewhere else, and we got our own little apartment. And within 2 years, my life had gone from using for 3-day periods to using for 5 days straight. I wouldn't eat anything in that 5-day period. I would sleep for a day, full day sometimes, half a day most of the time. And as soon as I woke up, I would be calling somebody. I might get maybe through the rest of the day without using, but then come nightfall, I was looking for the next party because I was so uncomfortable in my own skin. I knew that there was something wrong with me, and I didn't want to admit it to myself. And so I started realizing that maybe there was something wrong. And so I called a drug helpline and said I was going to get some help. I thought maybe I might need some help. Right? And so I called this drug helpline, and this guy said the same thing. He reiterated the exact same thing I did. Well, you might need to go to treatment. I didn't go to treatment. Okay, I went to Sylvan Lake, and I decided I just needed a month break away from everything, that I could come back to the same apartment, the same life, the same friends, and be okay. I just needed a break away from it. Because the truth is, I didn't understand what being an addict meant. And I didn't understand that I did not have the power to stop. I had lost my willpower. Somewhere along the lines, I had lost the willpower to control my using. And I was unable to stop anymore. And it didn't take me very long. About 6 months after that, it just continued to get worse. My life got really, really dark and really, really scary. And there was one time that I had overdosed, and if it wasn't for my friend that had been over there, my daughter would have had to witness all of that by herself. She was there almost every single time that I used, because I wouldn't leave her with anybody. I was too scared that, somebody might mistreat her, or that somebody might not care enough for her. I was worried about all of these things people might do, so I kept her around every time that I used, thinking that I was a functioning addict, when really all I did was sit there and trip out the entire time. I was emotionally unavailable for her every single time. And so I went to Sylvan Lake and decided I was going to do this geographical change. So I went to Sylvan Lake and I was there for a couple of weeks, and then I called the drug helpline again. And when I talked to the drug helpline, they said to me that there were statistics, and just so everybody is aware that I don't believe this to be a true opinion, but the guy on the other end of the drug helpline said that statistically, private treatment centers have an 86% success rate, and that government-funded treatment centers have a 30-something percent success rate. Just so you're aware, if you're the real addict like I am, it doesn't matter how much money you spend on treatment. If you don't have a spiritual solution, as I've come to know today, it's not going to fix anything. When you spend away, it's not going to help. And that was exactly what happened. My mom, I was the only addict in my life, so my family said, well, if money's going to fix all of this, then we'll give you some money. And they did. They spent almost $20,000 to send me to a private treatment center, and I didn't even finish it. Because the first time that I sat in a meeting like this, and the first time I sat in a 12-step meeting, they told me I was going to be an addict for the rest of my life. And I shit you not, it was like the world stopped moving around me for that brief moment. I was like, what do you mean? I came here for you people to fix me. My family paid good money for you people to fix me so I can go back to using cocaine like a lady. That's what I came here for, right? And it terrified me, because when you told me I was going to be an addict, I believed that to be misery, chaos, pain. It meant that I was going to continue to disappoint my family. I was going to continue to steal, lie, cheat, and manipulate my family, my friends, and I was literally going to wreak havoc on every living thing that I touched. That's what being an addict meant to me. That's what I'd done for over 10 years. That's what being an addict meant to me. And it scared me so bad, I was so unready to hear it, and I hadn't apparently hit a rock bottom sufficient enough for me to want to get help. And believe it or not, this treatment center was a 12-step fellowship, or 12-step treatment center. And believe it or not, even though like God is in almost every one of those steps, believe it or not, to this day, I don't recollect that anybody or anything in that treatment center surrounding, like I don't even remember the word higher power or God being mentioned. That's how unready I was to listen to what they had to offer me. And it's in all of the steps, like, and I worked every single one of them up to step 10 as they directed me in this treatment center, but I don't remember them ever talking about God or needing a higher power. I don't remember that, right? And so I went out again, and so I moved into Sylvan Lake after I didn't complete this treatment center, decided to stay there, and within a month or two, I had recreated the entire same lifestyle that I had, but in a different city. I tried the geographical change, and it didn't work. And so what did I do? Well, I fixed it with a relationship. I got into a relationship right before I went into treatment, and that was how I was going to fix it. So I ended up in this relationship, and of course, 7 months down the road, I ended up with another baby. That was going to fix it, because the first one worked so well. That's exactly what I need, is I need more children in my life. And so I did, and I very selfishly got pregnant again, and so now I have another beautiful daughter, and some of you have seen her around here, a cute little 2-year-old that runs around and won't stop talking. That one's mine. And it didn't take very long. Within the year, I moved back into the city, and again, I recreated the exact same chaos that I had all over again. Right back in the city of Calgary, and I hadn't spoken to those people in almost 2.5 years. So when I came back to the city, I gave birth to my second daughter. Now, my addiction had escalated so badly this time around, once I had started again after treatment, that for the duration of my pregnancy, I wasn't able to stop using or drinking. And I hated myself so badly for it that, believe it or not, it caused me to drink and use more, right? Because anytime anything has ever happened in my life that's negative or makes me feel shameful, guilty and remorseful, I fix it by doing more drugs or alcohol to wipe out any thought of it, to pretend like it doesn't exist. That's how I dealt with reality. And so I'm very lucky today. There is nothing wrong so far with my daughter, and that could change. That's another important key reminder, is that could change when she gets older. She could have many developmental problems. She could have many learning disabilities when she gets older. For now, there's nothing wrong with her, right? And she was born healthy. But to be honest, when I went into labor with her, I had been doing cocaine for 3 days straight when I went into labor with my daughter. And I don't even remember being joyful. I hardly remember her being born, because the entire time that I was sitting there giving birth to her, I was so terrified that they would take blood tests of some type and they would find out that I was high on cocaine, that I didn't even get to enjoy her coming into this world. That's how badly my disease had escalated. Is that none of those things mattered. And I put her at risk, and of course I managed to stop for a couple of days when I brought her home. Then I decided to have a couple of friends over to celebrate her being born. And guess how I celebrated her coming into this world? I got high. I had a bunch of friends over and we all got high. That's how I celebrated my second daughter coming into this world. It didn't take very long, and within a month, the most unimaginable thing had happened. And I got a knock on my door from the CFS, and they told me they were taking my children away. They had done some tests, and I knew it was going to show up. And I still continued, believe it or not. When they talk about insanity, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves will restore us to sanity. And what they mean by being insane is that essentially what I kept doing was I kept doing the very thing that kept taking everything out from underneath my feet. I solved it by doing that exact same thing over and over and over again. Every time something bad happened, every time I lost something, I would do more cocaine. I would drink more alcohol. I would find more drugs. Every single time, that was my solution to life. And I didn't know how to stop it. And believe it or not, my children were gone out of my care for almost 2 years minus a month. And until the last 8 months of that, when I finally decided that I was really going to give recovery a shot, I wasted every opportunity to actually get them back into my care. And I was served with a permanent guardianship order. It meant that I could not get my shit together and we're taking your kids away and you're going to trial in a year. And so I had to really get with the program and say, okay, like I'm going to do this time. And I jumped in and out of the programs for, a couple of months, and I tried to do it. I never managed to rack up more than 30 days. I did this thing where I did the steps, and I would do the thing where I go to a meeting and I talk about how crappy my day was and how grateful I am to be alive today. My program was surrounded by gratitude and nothing else, no more work. And so I do this thing where I'd read the steps on the board. Admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that my life had to become unmanageable. I'm like, well, of course, that's why I'm here. Step 1, check. And then I move on to step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, I'm not using, so obviously I'm not insane anymore. Check. And I go on to 3, turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. And I'm like, I don't even understand that one, so check. And I'd move on. And then I'd say a moral inventory. And I'd be like, well, I know I've done some messed up things, but I'm not a bad person. I mean, I know I need to apologize for my mistakes. Check. And I'd read them off of the board. And that's literally how I would do the steps in my head. And then I tried doing the thing when that didn't work and I relapsed a month later. Then I do the thing where I'd open up the book and I'd start reading the chapters. Well, I don't know if you guys have ever looked inside a big book, and believe it or not, I didn't even realize it until I was like over a year clean, until about 8-9 months ago-ish. Somewhere around there, I opened up the book, and for the first time in my life, I realized that there aren't even 12 chapters in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know what the hell I was going to do when I got to step 12. There's only 11 chapters in that book, right? And so I tried every easier, softer way, and I proved myself wrong. And when it finally came to the choice where I did not have an option anymore and I needed to get my shit together or I was going to lose those kids forever, and I knew the inevitable was going to happen. If I lost those kids, I was going to cease to have a reason to exist, and my life was going to, if I was lucky enough, I would die a miserable, alcoholic, drug-addicted life. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted so desperately to be alive. And so I decided maybe I would listen to what some of these people in the rooms were telling me, and that's how I stumbled across Cocaine Anonymous, was I actually gave it a shot. And you see, the most miraculous thing has happened in my life. Somewhere between 9 months and 1 year of my clean time, I was sharing it for the 50th time. And when I was sharing my story, and somebody asked me at the end, and they said, well, how many days is it until your 1 year? Like, I knew what my sobriety date was. I knew it was May 22nd of that year. I knew when my 1 year was coming up, but I didn't know how many days away it was. Like, I had stopped counting. And the most amazing thing had happened, and it was one of those spiritual experiences. I had realized that being sober was a normal part of my life, that I no longer had to count how many days I was sober anymore because it was normal for me. And it was one of the most miraculous experiences that I've ever had, where God just overwhelmed me. Another really big one was step 3 for me. When I just finished doing my step 3, I had relapsed right after I got out of treatment for the very last time in April of 2017, right before I got clean, and I relapsed when I got out of that treatment center. And so hence my sobriety date is May 22nd of 2017. And so when I got out of that treatment center and I had relapsed and then had to restart all over again, and I didn't tell my CFS worker that this relapse had happened because I really wanted to be sober, and I did. I kept doing the work, and I kept working through the steps regardless. And I really meant it this time. I just didn't want to exhaust literally my last option. So she randomly, 6 weeks-ish later, she called a random drug test, and I knew it was going to happen. And I stuck to my guns, and I didn't say anything about it. However, the consequences for that, when the drug test did come back, I was almost 2 months clean. And when the drug results did come back, they did show positive, and there was consequence for my actions, and I knew there would be consequences, and I knew they were going to be harsh, a lot harsher than anything before, because I had exhausted all options. And I just finished taking my step 3 decision with my sponsor. And I said to myself, no matter what the consequences of these actions are, I need to be able to stay okay with God and trust that God is going to get me through this. And my step 3 was exactly that. My sponsor asked me to write in the beginning of my book that I was going to essentially write a contract with God to finish the rest of the steps. That's all that step 3 was just to believe that God was going to get me through the rest of those steps. And then as long as I did them to the best of my ability, as honestly as I could, I was going to be okay. And if it doesn't work, I'm always going to have drugs and alcohol to just depend on after that. But I need to give it a try because I have nothing left. I have nothing left at this point, and if I don't get this right, I'm going to have nothing to live for. And so I did, and I got through it, and there were some days where I literally laid crouched down in the fetal position in my bed, screaming in my own head because I could literally hear two voices. There was the voice that was led by God that said, you can do this. You're going to be okay. I'm going to get you through this. And there was the other side of me that was there that was self-will run that said, just go pick up a bag. You'll be fine. You don't have to worry about it. It'll get rid of all of this pain and fear that you're feeling, and you're going to be okay, and you'll figure out the rest later. You've always had options. They've always come back around and let you see the kids again later. They'll do it again this time. And it was like this monstrosity of an argument going on in my head, and it was the most terrifying thing in the world. But God got me through it. I continued to pray like my sponsor did, and I got through it completely sober. And I wasn't allowed to see my kids. The consequences were that I wasn't allowed to be in the same room as my children for 2 months. I wasn't allowed to have any phone calls with them for 2 months. And that was the longest I had ever gone without having any contact with them since they were born, both of them. And God got me through every single minute of it. And by the time they came back home, I was pretty much finished my steps, and I was working on getting the rest of them done. Another huge experience for me, a big God shot, was in step 9, when I did my step 9 with my family. Because when I was on step 2, I was one of those people that thought I should be on step 9. I was really ready to apologize and say that I was sorry. You see what I mean? I didn't even understand what step 9 was, but I was ready to do it. And so one of the biggest things that step 9 has taught me throughout my life and continues to teach me throughout my life is love and tolerance of other people. By accepting that I too make mistakes, by accepting that I need to take ownership for my mistakes, I have learned how to be accepting of other people's mistakes, to give other people a second chance, and to be helpful when somebody makes a mistake, as opposed to criticizing them and judging them. It's by far not something I'm perfect at, but it's something I continue to work at. And of course, step 12. So by the time I was 4 months sober, I had finished my steps, and I immediately started working with other people. Immediately. And that was the only thing that my sponsor asked me of, because the book tells us that a sponsor doesn't have any right to come from a spiritual hilltop. We don't have the right to request specific things of you, to tell you that you can't be in a relationship, or to tell you that you have to go to so many meetings in so many days. A sponsor doesn't have the right to do that according to this book, and my sponsor didn't. She was there to guide me, and she was there to give me suggestions. Sometimes I took them, sometimes I didn't. There were some things I still had to learn the hard way. But for the most part, she was just there to support me, and she helped me get through the work. And I slowly began to grow spiritually, and I started to figure out the mistakes prior to them happening. But the only thing that my sponsor did require of me was what's in the book, was that when I am finished, I immediately start working with other people. And it tells us in the Working with Others chapter, the 11th chapter of the book, it tells us that working with other people is the only thing that ensures me immunity from my alcoholism and my using. It's the only thing. When all other activities fail, helping others will save the day. And it has always been proven true. When I've gotten into some pretty horrible arguments in my life where I thought some really good things were coming to an end, or when me and my mom had a huge blow up at each other and all the things from our past came up and I didn't think I was going to be able to make it, I would call a sponsee and see if they could do some step work. Or coincidentally, God would put that sponsee in my place because I didn't want to do it. God works through other people in my life today. And so I had one incident where a sponsee called me and said, hey, I need to be able to do some work and stuff. I know we're supposed to work tomorrow, but can we do it today instead? And I'm like, yes, let's do it. I need some God in my life right now because I'm feeling really selfish and I want to blow up and I want to murder everybody. And it worked. It worked. By the end of that, I was feeling a little bit more loving and tolerant, and I was able to suck up my pride, and I was able to do the right thing that had caused the chaos that was in my life at that moment. God continues every single day to work through the people that are around me. And the only thing that I have to do to keep that up is to do my step 10, 11, and 12. I work with other people. I take daily inventory as often as I can, as often as it is needed. It's not something I'm perfect at, but I do my best to do it as often as I can. And praying and meditating is something I never stop doing. So today, my day typically looks like when I wake up in the morning, I go and I brush my teeth and I look myself in the mirror and I look myself in my head. I'm like, you are not running the show today. And then I close my eyes and I say to God, and I say, God, I cannot do this today. I need your help. Let my words be your words. Let my actions be your actions. And I remind myself that God isn't running the show. When I forget to do that, my life gets pretty messy. And there's times where I have to remind myself that I'm not in the show. It's not a once a day thing. There's some days I have really crappy days and I need to do it 6 or 7 times a day. And it almost never fails to work. As long as I get myself and my pride and my ego out of the way, it almost always works. And then when I go to bed at the end of the night, something that another member of our fellowship taught me, Mr. Jimmy B, something that he said in a meeting that I started doing, was that when you go to bed at night, you pray that you be treated by others the same way that you have treated people today. And it certainly helps keep me in check, because I've just prayed, if I've just been a really shitty person to everybody around me today, I've just prayed that everybody else tomorrow treats me really shitty the same way I just did. And it helps keep me in check and helps remind me. And it's also a really good reminder for when I'm doing my step 10 when I do that, because it's like instantly when I pray for somebody to treat me the way that I've just treated somebody today, it's like instantly when I go to do my step 10, I'm like, oh, I was really shitty about that. I should probably add that to my step 10. And then I start working through it in my head and stuff. Believe it or not, though, somewhere shortly after my 1 year, I stopped believing that step 10 and 11 were something that I needed to do. And I will tell you right now that being a dry drunk is a hell of a lot more miserable than being a drunk. I was miserable. It seems like I'm not the only one who's made that mistake. But you see, I didn't have alcohol and drugs to hide behind me. So when I started becoming irritable, restless, and discontent, and miserable, and just a shitty person to other people, I didn't have drugs and alcohol to hide behind this time. And so I was just in absolute pain on the inside and just complete emotional turmoil because of what I had done, and because I ceased to allow God to be a part of my life every single moment. And I became very miserable. Really, really miserable. And you know, the very sad truth about this is that another huge God shot that's happened in my life is that somewhere close to my 1 year, and when I stopped doing that step 10 and 11, you see, the thing is that when I don't keep in fit spiritual condition, the obsession comes back, and I started to play with the thought of, well, maybe I could just have a drink again. Or maybe, you know, the kids are coming home in a month, hopefully. Like, you know, once they come home, I could start using drugs casually again. And I literally started to make it up, and the obsession was starting to return. And you see, the day that I went to go and pick up my children from court, it was April 3rd of last year. And it was right around there was just days before that I was starting to picture it. I spent a good 20 minutes just in complete pause of my life and inside my own head thinking about the ways that I could get away with using drugs when the kids came home. This was just 2 to 3 days prior to when this happened. And so I went to court on April 3rd, and that morning I woke up saying, like, God's in my life, and I'm doing good, and I'm finished the steps, and working with others, and my life is amazing, and I am going to get these children back. And within 10 minutes of me waking up, I got a message on Facebook from somebody, and they asked me to give them a call right away, and I did. And it was a friend of mine that didn't stick with the program, that didn't do the work, and he said that she had passed away. And the thing was is that she also has a son, it's pretty close to Mia's age here, that was also taken away by CFS. So essentially what God was showing me that day was that the end result was going to look the exact same way that her little boy did. Basically, God was telling me that there was another little boy in this world that is never going to have the opportunity to go home to his mother. And here I was going to court that day to go and pick up my kids so that they could come home for the first time in 2 years. And it wasn't long after that I sought out help, and I started doing my step 10 and 11 again. And actually not since that period has the obsession or the thought to use or drink ever come back. It does take a lot of work. It's not... but it's also not difficult, and I know that's a bit of a weird statement to make, but I mean, every time that I did a step, when I said step 3, when I said earlier, I'm like, well, I don't even understand that, so check, you know what I mean? So when I had a sponsor explain it to me, I'm like, oh, well, that wasn't so hard, and then when I did step 4, I was terrified, like most people are. I was terrified to take a really good look at myself and the harms that I had done to people, but once I did it, I was like, well, that's relieving. What did I wait for so long? Why didn't I do this earlier? And then I got to like the step 9 where I started making amends and stuff. And I'm like, that was really relieving. And I'm happy that I was able to, to own up to my mistakes for once in my life. What did I wait so long for? And it was like every single one of those. I was like, why on earth did I wait so long? And now that I'm finished the steps, I'm like, fuck, I could have saved myself a lot of pain and a lot of terror if I had just done the work the way it was intended to be done in the first place. But as you know, most of us aren't one-hit wonders. Most of us don't say, here of this 12 steps, and we're like, oh, I can do all of those, let's get started. And then actually stick to it without a little bit of struggle, without saying, well, I think I might have a different, better way. Almost none of us have ever not done that, and that's the harsh reality of it. Today, my life is blessed. I do a lot of service work. And the reason that I do a lot of service work is because I enjoy giving back to the fellowship that connected me with a higher power that has literally saved my life. I do a lot of service work. a lot of service work, and it was one of the very first things that I ever did, and I got pushed into a GSR position, was the very first one that I ever did. And almost always, every time I got myself into service first in the beginning, I had no idea what I was doing. But the people around me helped me figure it out, and the people around me helped support me, and I followed through with everything that I set out to do. And I continue to do service work because I love being of service to other people, and the truth is that if all of us stopped doing our service work and none of us showed up for those of us that do contribute to service work, the fact is that this wouldn't be here. If none of the people that were here before me hadn't done service work, I wouldn't have had a place to come and recover. I wouldn't have found the rooms of CA that have captured my heart today. I'm very grateful to be here today, and I want to thank each and every one of you for listening today, and I hope I've brightened up your day just a little bit. Thanks.